I ask you guys, do you have any questions now that you've kind of stepped away from what we talked about? Because we talked for close to an hour and a half on introductions and setting expectations for what you can expect for the class. Do you have any questions before I jump into actual Babok material? Okay, so let's go ahead and jump. Yes.
No questions.
No questions. Okay. So let's jump into these key terms. All right. So Babok. What is business analysis according to the Babok? It's about bringing about change, right? It's about bringing about change for an enterprise. And an enterprise, the reason this doesn't say organization is because organization means something a little different in the Babok. Enterprise implies a holistic set of attributes that make a business or a company, right? So it's the combination of all kinds of stuff. But it's about enabling change in that organization by identifying needs, not wants, but needs. And then figuring out what are the ways that we can address those needs and provide value to the stakeholders and the enterprise. So really what you're trying to do is you're trying to drive value and you're trying to support the organization meeting its strategic objectives. Right? Okay, so 1 second. There we go. It's lagging. One of the biggest things that this is all about is the needs, right? And it's about getting to the true needs. And those needs are usually represented by either a problem that needs to be solved or an opportunity we should try to take advantage of. Okay? So BA information, this is a term that you're going to see. And what it means is all the stuff that we look at, consume, absorb, evaluate, analyze, and convert into other stuff. So this is things like when you are trying to understand a problem and you're asking for current policies and procedures. You're asking for examples of the form that gets used. You're asking to see the system. You're having a meeting and you take minutes on the meeting. All of that stuff is BA information. So it's not just the requirements. It's all of the stuff that helped you get to the requirements as well. Okay. So all the stuff that you do before you get requirements and all the stuff that you do after the requirements plus the requirements equal business analysis information. Not all of this gets consumed by people in a quote requirements package of some sort. It's not just the requirements either. You don't want the requirements to sit out there with no supporting information that helps you understand how'd you come to those requirements. So BA information is about all of that stuff holistically. And we're going to talk about that in using a model, a visual, because again, we do a lot of modeling as analysts. And what do they say about pictures, guys? What is it worth? What is a picture worth? 1,000 words. Yeah. People are visual beings. We will read if we have to, but often if we are provided a picture, now not only do we understand the concept better, we understand it more quickly, and it engages your brain different, especially if you use color. It actually has a chemical impact to the way your brain functions and responds to input. So we're going to use some pictures here. So requirements are a big part of what we do, but it's not the only thing that we engage with, right? So we will have plans, we'll have meeting minutes, we'll have models that we're building, we'll have all kinds of stuff that rolls all up together to make business analysis information. Okay? So this is BA information. A requirement. What is a requirement? It's a usable representation of a need. And again, a need is a problem or an opportunity. And when we're talking about this, usually we will present our requirements in some form of documentation, right? Even if you have a requirements management tool, which is not too terribly common, unfortunately, for a business analyst to be using an actual requirements management tool, but if you do have one, it still produces a work product, right? And that's your requirement. You might combine multiple work products into a single report that you can actually deliver to a resource or a stakeholder for approval. That's a requirements document. So usually it's a form of documentation. BRDs, SRSs, those things are out there. Business requirements documents or system requirement specifications, that's a little bit more of a traditional approach. And then you also have the situation where if you're working in an agile world, a requirement can be represented with a feature, model, theme, etc., right? So a requirement, essentially the most important thing you need to know, is a usable representation of a need. For those of you that are doing ECBA, your question will very likely be, which of the following is a usable representation of a need? And requirement will be one of the options, right? Those of you that are doing CCBA and CBAP, you might be given a situation where you're given a scenario in there and you're asking, which of the following would be an appropriate representation of a need given the circumstance? And then you'll have to understand your techniques and understand the inputs and outputs in order to answer the question correctly. Because it might have a BRD and then it might have some other stuff, but some of the other stuff is not necessarily appropriate given the context that you were presented. So think about that. Design is a word you're going to see a lot. This is new to BABOK 3.0. In the past, it was just requirements. Now they've added design definition. Now what that means is the usable representation of a solution. And it focuses on what we're trying to accomplish for that stakeholder. Often it comes in the form of UI work, right? A design can be a business process model. It can be a screen mock-up. That would be the user interface design. It could be business rules, right? That are placed in a business rules engine. It could be a matrix. It could be any kind of thing that helps me understand the design of the solution. And keep in mind, the BABOK does not subscribe the solution type. Most of us work in technology, but business analysis is applicable regardless of whether technology is involved or not. The process of understanding the problem or opportunity, identifying what the underlying true need is, understanding the ways we can solve for that and implement a solution may or may not involve technology. IIBA focuses on business analysts define solutions that come in the form of data, technology, people, and or process. Any combination of any of those four. You might just provide a new organizational structure. That's a usable representation of a solution if all you're doing is recommending structure change for how people are structured in an organization, who they report to, how their capabilities are grouped. Maybe all you're trying to do is recommend a modification to process. Your usable representation of a solution is going to be a business process model. So you get the point there, right? So a design is not just UI, it is any usable representation of what that future would look like. Enterprise. This is a combination of one or more organizations and the solutions they use to accomplish what is to be accomplished. So those strategic objectives. So what that means, an organization, and we're probably going to cover this, but it's in this slide and I want to cover it now. An organization is a group of people. That could be a claims group. It could be HR. It could be accounting. And it's the combination of all of those together and the systems and tools and data and everything that they use, the building they're in, the seats they sit in, all of that stuff all together, it makes up what the enterprise is, right? What is the enterprise? Primarily focusing on people structure and the technology or manual tools that they use to accomplish their goal. Okay, so it might actually be not even just a central company. You could have a group of companies that make up an overall enterprise. Okay, so keep that in mind too. The typical structure of an enterprise. I already mentioned I already talked about the overall enterprise and then HR, etc., but you can break it down even further because HR might have sub-departments. They might have a whole group of training resources. They might have a whole group of recruiters, things like that. So, but it also, enterprise architecture also includes all of the systems that they use. So when you're talking about an enterprise architecture, I'm going to do something really quick here. I'm going to deviate a little bit. So an enterprise architecture usually looks a bit more like something like this, where it talks about the structure, the roles, the governance, and then the things that go into it. You don't just have, you have the business with the people, the information they manage, the data, the applications, and the infrastructure, as well as these. So it's all of these things. It's not just people. Business architecture is not just people. It's the people and processes as well as the technology and the strategy by which all of that works together. That's architecture. Okay. So that is enterprise architecture. Then you have organization. I already talked about this because I felt like it was important to explain and describe it in the last slide. It's a group of people that can work for the function they serve autonomously. So HR doesn't constantly have to engage every other department in the organization to do what they do. They just do what they do, right? Now they'll still report to leadership and they'll still make sure that they're following standards and, focusing on the goals at hand. But it's an autonomous group of people that are trying to accomplish a specific thing. So an organization down at the lowest level, it could be the recruiting group just focusing on getting quality candidates in the door so that we can do business well. If it's HR in general, that organization is larger than just recruiting, but the overall group, recruiting and training and all of those functions need to work together to be able to support the human resource needs of the organization. And they do that on their own. Every once in a while, they'll pull in outside help, hopefully, from like a business analyst or IT or something like that. But by and large, they do their own thing, right? And it's usually wherever you see a leader, that person and everyone below them makes up an organization. So you have organizations within organizations, and ultimately you hit the enterprise level. A plan is just a proposal for doing something. It's like a structured approach to what you want to accomplish. Okay. So a plan is simply a proposal for doing or achieving something. That's straightforward. Requirements classification. So we have multiple levels of requirements. Okay. So we have the very, very top tier. The very first thing we need to try to drive to is the business requirement. That's the highest level requirement. It should be strategically oriented. Okay. So when we're talking about that, it needs to be something that's very intimately tied to the strategy. That's your business requirements. To be able to accomplish that thing that we're talking about there, stakeholders have needs. Right? Okay, well, if that's the business requirement, me as a stakeholder performing this function, I need these things. Okay? And then we have solution requirements. For those stakeholders to accomplish those things that they need, the solution needs to be able to do certain things. Now that's broken down into two other types of requirements. We have functional requirements, which are the things that the solution needs to functionally do. And it's not just an application. It's what does the solution functionally need to do? Business processes also can have functional requirements. These are the things that require action and are interactive with the stakeholder. Non-functional requirements are about quality. They sit in the background and they ensure that we're doing it well, right? So, for example, we talk about technology and we've designed this user interface and we say this user interface needs to do these things and then the user is going to be able to save that data. Well, how quickly should the system respond to those things the user's doing? Speed of response is considered a non-functional, because the person doesn't tell the system, I want you to respond this quickly. The person doesn't do anything that causes the system to be a speed. But the system we have expectations of how quickly the system can respond. And just saying the system shall respond quickly is not enough. It needs to be a lot better than that. It needs to be the system shall respond to 90% of the user inquiries within 2 seconds, right? That kind of thing. Things that are pretty, that aren't immediately tangible or visible to the user, but impact how we're going to design or develop the solution, whether it's a process or a technology, in order to achieve the goal. Let me hold on. I need to see something. Okay, we're going to see if they cover it in a minute. There's another type of requirement that I don't think is gone from the BABOK, but it wasn't listed there. Hold on. Give me one moment, please. I want to make sure that... What are you doing? There we go. Okay, yeah, that was missing a requirement. So if it doesn't show up on one of these slides, I'll verbally describe it to you, or I'll pull the BABOK over. Okay, business requirements. We've talked about this. These are the higher level goals of what the business needs in order to function in business well. It is the reason we engage in change. Okay, so the business requirements are the high level reason we're willing to go through the effort of trying to change something in the organization or the enterprise. And usually business requirements drive out a project. Now, if your organization is effectively using business analysts, a business analyst gets involved before a project ever begins. When we recognize that we might have a problem or opportunity, a business analyst can get involved, help vet out that problem or opportunity, determine how reasonable it is that we actually need to address it. A business analyst might say, you know what, your people just need to be trained. I'm not going to start a project. But there was a need, right? There's a need for me to initiate change, which means educating people will be a change to the current state of things. So it may or may not. A change doesn't have to be a project. Keep that in mind. Stakeholder requirements. We already talked about that. For us to be able to meet those business requirements, we need stakeholder requirements. In my system, it's called stakeholder requirements. In Agile, we call it a user story. They're one and the same thing. Solution requirements. This is where we talk about the capabilities or qualities, right? We already talked about that a little bit. The functional are the things that are capabilities, and those are the things that are actually interactive with a user. Non-functional is the quality element. That's about how well it performs those functions. So when we talk about functional requirements, a functional requirement will often have a quality requirement that goes with it. And then we have, here they are, transition requirements. So the solution, stakeholder, and business requirements, they don't go away until the enterprise changes, right? If our business model changes, if the industry changes, if our customers' needs change, those are going to be there. And once we put the solution in place, those requirements haven't stopped existing. They're just now met. But transition requirements are temporary. These are temporary requirements that help us move from one state to another. So they're things that we need to, they're capabilities we must have in order for us to get where we're trying to go. Like, I'm going to have to move data from one solution to another. I'm going to have to teach people. I'm going to need to do certain communication elements. certain things like that, right? So transition requirements are temporary requirements that go away once we're done. Once I've migrated the data, that's not a need anymore. The data is where it needs to be. Once I've trained users, I might have to train them again, but in a perfect world, it's considered a transition requirement. So business requirements. Here's an example of business stakeholder and solution requirements. So we want, now usually a business requirement is best if it's measurable. Okay, so to enable digital commerce for the enterprise, we would want to have something measurable by that. Your business requirements, it would be best if they were like a little bit more smart. I don't know if you've ever heard of SMART goals, but business requirements should really be a little bit more smart and be measurable, because that's usually how you're going to be able to determine if the change was successful. Because there's usually a reason. There's a reason we want to go digital. Why? Why do we want to go digital? Well, because if we don't go digital, we're probably going to lose some customers, because in this world right now, we have to be digital, right? So when we talk about being able to go digital, what do our people need, right? And there will be multiple stakeholder requirements, but we will talk about things that stakeholder needs to be able to have access to in order to be able to go digital. So the system must have the ability to sell products in multiple geographies. And honestly, this is three requirements. This is three stakeholder requirements. You want to be able to segregate these out, because you might tackle them at different times. And then you would have solution requirements. Okay, for us to be able to sell products in multiple currencies, what does that mean? Well, so the stakeholder requirement won't actually talk about the system. It'll talk about the sales, the VP of the sales department must be able to leverage a solution to sell blah, 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 right? And then you'll say, okay, well, for that to happen, the solution must support currency, US currency, because maybe it's a company that is in England and they want to start selling in the US. Well, they'll talk about the solution must convert US currency. The solution must convert all currency to the pound, right? But the solution also must present pricing to the customer in a US IP. You present US dollars, right? So those are the solution requirements. Stakeholders will say something about the stakeholder role, not the person's name, but the role. And a solution requirement will talk about what the solution must do. And that would be both functional and non-functional. So when you say that the solution must present US customers US currency, you would also want to have a non-functional requirement that the solution converts all currency into the pound in the back end where no one looks at it, right? So that's an example. And then the transition requirement for this kind of thing would be that the salespeople must be taught how to use the solution, that maybe we've got an existing solution. So we need to be able to convert data, or we need to be able to do certain things that we only have to do once. And those would be some transition requirements. So that's it for your key terms that you're going to see throughout that might be different than what you're used to seeing. Any questions?
I do have a question, Danica. Can the business requirements and the stakeholder requirements, can these two terms be used interchangeably?
No, the business has a need, and for the business to accomplish that need, people need to be able to do things, right? So one is from the bigger picture perspective, and then the stakeholder is from the perspective of that specific role in the organization. So your business requirements are usually things like, we want to increase client retention by 10% for a total of 90% retention. Well, that's not a stakeholder need. What does the stakeholder need for doing that? Well, the stakeholder needs to have easy access to, so one of my easiest examples is legacy modernization in an insurance company. And they had six different secondary supplemental insurance products, like things like short-term disability, life insurance, cancer insurance, stuff like that, right? Not your typical health and stuff like that, but so non-health, it was supplemental. And for every one of those 6 supplemental product lines, they had their own claims department. Okay. And they were using antiquated legacy systems to do so. And so their processing time was on average 5 days to process. Well, then one of their primary competitors comes out with this whole marketing campaign of we process claims in a day. We keep you whole faster. Okay, well, we started losing customers because people like their money, right? So the business need was to maintain a client retention rate of 90%. Okay, well, what are the stakeholder requirements for that? Well, the stakeholder, as a claims representative, I need easy access to the claims data so I can make an efficient decision. It needs to all be there. Okay, well, right now we don't require the customer to fill in all that stuff. Well, that's what's slowing us down. Okay, well, for them to own the fact for us to get them to own their part in expediting their claim process, we need to hold them accountable for giving us all the necessary information. So a stakeholder requirement for that customer might be, as a customer, I need to know what data you absolutely must have in order to process my claim efficiently, right? So those are stakeholder requirements to help us maintain a client retention rate, because our goal is to process claims faster. Okay, well, what does the solution have to do in order to ensure that the customer knows what fields are required? Well, the solution will set certain fields as required on the web interface where they submit their claim. And that's a solution requirement. So does that help?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay. I think I explain a lot better when I use my own examples, because these are not my examples. So, any other questions?
I don't know. Do we have access to this presentation?
Yes. You will have access to the slides in the presentations tab on your Succeed platform, and then you will have access to this video to watch and hear what I say again if you need to. Probably around Tuesday or Wednesday on your Succeed homepage.
All right. Okay. One other question. When you talk about organization and enterprise, I'm thinking like the example you gave about HR department where you have several organizations, recruitment and all that. So could we describe the HR as an enterprise in its own, made up of various organizations,
No, HR is not its own enterprise. HR is an organization. Enterprise is the group of organizations and all of the software that comes up to make a company. You could try to maybe equate enterprise to company, but an enterprise could also be multiple companies tied together. Like if you have wholly owned subsidiaries and your organization is managed at a higher level than the company level. Maybe you've got, like I worked for a banking company that also had a mortgage company, and they had other things. They had a lot of stuff. So it was Midland Financial Group as a big picture, but then that was broken down into like MidFirst Bank and Midland Mortgage and like a couple of other companies. The enterprise was Midland Group. And then each company was its own organization with its own systems and stuff. But the Midland enterprise provided all of the underlying infrastructure. So for MidFirst Bank, the infrastructure wasn't unique to them. They shared it with other organizations. Therefore, it rolled up as an overall enterprise. Does that make sense? Okay.
I have a question, Laura. So you said you use the word like unique system. So is it like a criteria to define an enterprise as long as it has its own unique infrastructure, application, IP, whatever? Is that a prerequisite to say it's at the enterprise level, just as you define the bank, which was a part of the Midland Group, but then it had its own infrastructure?
It did not have its own infrastructure. It shared all of the infrastructure with Midland Group.
Okay.
Yep. Now, you could have a situation where an organization operated all on its own and didn't tie to anything with the exception of like finances up to the overall enterprise, then you could consider that to be an enterprise. But then you would have an enterprise within an enterprise.
Got it. Thank you.
You bet. Any other questions? Okay. So we are 30 minutes in. We have time to cover the next piece. So we're going to talk about the knowledge areas. This is where you're going to want to get your pen and paper, or maybe you have Excel open in another tab, and you're going to want to start listening to what I'm describing with these knowledge areas and thinking about your experience and kind of evaluating that. Because in the first 2 weeks, those of you that have chosen non-CBAP, like if you're ECBA, and in your mind, you've got like 1.5 years of experience and you need 2.5 years of experience to do CCBA. But as I'm talking through this, you're realizing, you know what? I've done more than I think I've done. Before the end of next week, you would want to know that and make a decision if you want to, go for it and try the next level up and upgrade your account for your training. Okay, so keep that in mind. Because honestly, if you qualify for CCBA, that's where you want to start. You do not want to take tests that aren't, you don't want to take ECBA and then find out, oh, you know what, I actually qualified for CCBA, and then not only have to pay for the exam fee for that, but then go through the pain of doing another test. So you want to make sure that you start where it's appropriate for you. So keep that in mind as we're walking through this. We'll cover the knowledge areas. There are 6 of them. These are the areas of BA expertise. Not all areas apply to all levels of certification. You'll want to understand the theory across all levels, but some of these knowledge areas are more heavily tested based on the certification level you're going for. Okay. One of the things that you'll notice is that almost everything impacts almost everything. At any given point, I might be talking to people and getting people to collaborate, and then I realize I missed something, so I have to return back to planning and monitoring, reassess what I was going to do, and then I might have to do some strategy analysis before I can actually go do anything else. So and then from strategy analysis, I might jump back to elicitation and collaboration. So there is no, like with project management, highly structured. I don't know why, but a lot of people seem to think that business analysis is like red tape and it's all kinds of structure. It is the least structured function I've ever done. And when I step into a change, it's often chaos and no one really knows where we need to start. No one knows the questions we need to ask. We just start doing. And then we learn. And then we wind up having to shift back and forth to, different steps because we missed something. Once we get into a project, we should have a decent idea about what we're doing, and we can be a lot more structured. We can still be flexible and adaptable, with Agile, but we do still have a structure to things. Business analysis should always come before any of that starts, because that's where we figure out what the heck are we even trying to do, right? And to figure that out, we often have to return back to previous steps because we learn something new that changes our understanding. And it's the biggest challenge we as analysts have to ensure that we are aware of and don't fall into is analysis paralysis. Okay, so there is not those of you that are new to this, I just need you to hold on to your seat, because it's not going to be as structured as you would like. It is a very unstructured skill set. So we're going to talk about all of these in this order. We're going to cover the first 2 tomorrow. We won't be covering that today. We're going to cover the first 2 tomorrow. If I have a chance to get started on planning and monitoring, I might do that today, just so I don't keep you long tomorrow. But planning and monitoring and elicitation and collaboration are set for tomorrow. Next Saturday is requirements lifecycle and strategy. Next Sunday is RAD and solution evaluation. Okay. Now, This is the order that we're covering them in. Okay? It's not necessarily the order that you execute. It's just the order we're covering them. Usually someone comes to us and starts talking to us about a need. Well, we're talking to people. So we're collaborating with someone, possibly asking them questions. That's elicitation. And we say, okay, so I think I know what you're asking me to do. Let me go think about that and figure out who I need to talk to, right? So then I start planning and monitoring. Once I finish planning and monitoring, I start talking to people, getting people in rooms. And while I'm talking to them, I'm figuring out what are we really here for? What are we trying to accomplish? And what are the options to get there? Once I get that done and I figure out where we're trying to go compared to where we are, now I start analyzing the gap. Anyway, I'm going to go into all of these individually. And so you run through these. And when I start trying to define things, I realize I missed something. I have to switch back to strategy analysis. If I realize I missed a person completely that I need to engage, I'm going to have to go to planning, monitoring, return back to elicitation and collaboration, make sure my strategy understanding is still correct before I go back into RAD. So there's no one defined order. The only defined order for you in this process is the order that we're going to cover them. Sorry. All right. So planning and monitoring, not an exciting topic. It's really not. It's a lot of task stuff, making sure that we're scheduling our meetings, understanding the cost of the solution and understanding the cost of the activities we're going to have to perform. Making sure that we have a well-defined scope and making sure we understand our stakeholders. Sounds a lot like project management, but it's only about the business analysis process. When I do this, I don't even know if I'm going to have a project. Now, if I do this and then we go through the process and I define, yep, we really do need to do this change, and it's a change that's big enough that it needs a project structure, now the project manager will consume a lot of what I did in planning and monitoring to help them manage the next steps, right? So that's planning and monitoring. Not an exciting topic. It's a lot of structured thinking, a lot of task and time and people identification and planning out what am I going to do to figure this out and to solve this problem. Elicitation and collaboration. This can be one of our more stressful activities, particularly that third word on that slide. This is where we talk to people. We do interviews, we do workshops, we do walkthroughs, we do things like that for multiple reasons. We're trying to elicit understanding. We're trying to understand what are your needs, what should the solution do, what are the problems that are happening. That's where we're trying to understand, where are you now? Why is that not working? What can we not change? Stuff like that. So I'm eliciting. If you get in, now that you're getting involved in IIBA, we request that you remove the word gather from your vocabulary, because there's a big difference between elicitation and gathering. Gathering implies that you just have to, it's there it's there visually, it's easy to see, you just go pick it up. Those of you that have been doing business analysis for a while, I would expect you very seldom have it that easy. I expect you feel like you're pulling teeth trying to get information out of people because you need to understand things in a way that you can truly get what's not working right. And sometimes people are really uncomfortable sharing that. So you do elicitation. And the definition of elicitation is to draw forth, meaning you are pulling that out of resources. You could be pulling it out of people. You could be pulling it out of systems by playing around with a system and understanding it. You could pull it out of documentation that you're reading, but you are still pulling it out. If we were gathering requirements, that implies the requirements are already there. Just got to pick them up. And that's not what we live with. Elicitation also involves confirming that we understood everything right, confirming that our documentation is effective, confirming that we're on the same page with everybody, communicating and collaborating with stakeholders. That is the hardest part of what we do. Most people don't like change. It's different. It's the unknown. That means it's scary. We often are uncomfortable with something that we can't define today. And so that's what Salvador heard me talking about, was how do you elicit and communicate with people that are in a place of discomfort, resistance, and all that comes from fear? How do you get them out of that fear and into excitement so you can help them change? That's all about elicitation and collaboration. And there are a ton of techniques for how you can do that and overcome those barriers and get really good information out of people and systems and processes very, very quickly. So elicitation and collaboration is something that we spend a decent amount of time on. And this is how we ensure that we understand everything and that we've defined good solutions, by working with others. You can't solution in a vacuum. You will draw your pictures and stuff, and then you will validate that with people and make sure that you're all on the same page and no one's going off the range. Requirements lifecycle management. I love elicitation and collaboration. I'm not a fan of business analysis, planning, and monitoring. I'm also not a fan of requirements lifecycle management. These are a lot more about tactical activity, not really interactive or creative or whatever. This is about making sure that I've got my I's dotted and my T's crossed and making sure I'm not messing anything up. So this is where once we've got requirements written, we're managing them through the life cycle. From the moment we start hearing about them to the moment we deprecate them because we've changed our business model or we've changed our process behavior or something changes in our environment, makes that requirement no longer necessary. So this is where requirements lifecycle management helps us define how are we going to store it? How are we going to manage it? What are the statuses our requirements move through? What kind of approval structures do we need? All kinds of stuff like that is in requirements lifecycle management. And my favorite is strategy analysis. I would remove the term IT change because strategy analysis is not specific to IT in the BABOK. The IIBA wants us to see business analysts as a change enabler. Doesn't have to be in IT, doesn't have to be in business. And actually, I have a podcast out there of where does a business analyst belong in an organization? And I do not believe it belongs in IT, and I don't believe it belongs in the business. We are supposed to bridge the gap between those two. So we should live between those two. Strategy analysis is about us really digging into that need, challenging it, asking, why do we need to do this? Because we want to understand what is the strategic or tactical importance. What are we really trying to do here? If it doesn't marry up to the strategy of the organization, then it's probably not necessary. And people just have wants and not needs. So sometimes when you're digging into something and you're starting to dive into the elicitation and collaboration to understand the why and the wherefore, now you're in strategy analysis, using elicitation and collaboration to accomplish it. And you might find out that it's a frivolous request. Well, if that's the case, as politely as possible, you figure out how to close that loop and not do a project. Most of the time, if you get an opportunity to engage in this, you're uncovering that there is a need and we do need change, and you're helping them figure out what does that future state look like. So this is strategy analysis, is where we start talking about where are you today? Why does that or does that not work? Right? I'm doing what's called CRAC, and it's KRAC. I'm trying to figure out, with this current situation, with your current state, what do you want to keep? What has to go away? Remove. What should we add to this situation in order to solve for this need? And what do we need to change a little bit? So CRAC. Keep, remove, add, change. That's what I'm doing in strategy analysis. I'm talking to people about where they are today, figuring out why that doesn't work, helping them understand and envision that future state and what that looks like, comparing the differences between the two, understanding what needs to change to get from and to, and using some requirements analysis and design definition. I document some high-level requirements, figure out what solution options are appropriate, determine the value of those, and then I come back to strategy analysis and say, okay, which of these is going to work? And we pick a strategy. So in strategy analysis, you're going to see define current state, understand current state, define future state, do the gap analysis, and define the change strategy, and understand risks. Understand risks is in there too. So that's strategy analysis. Really, essentially, strategy analysis is about you being Google for business. A lot of people don't want to do strategy analysis. They just want to get to tomorrow as fast as possible. Yesterday, if possible, preferably. So when I get that resistance and I'm trying to describe to people what this knowledge area is, I tell them, pretend I'm Google. You're telling me where you want to go, right? Yep. That's the first thing you usually do when you open up Google Maps is you say, I want to go to the zoo. Yeah. So I want to go to the zoo. Okay, great. But where are you right now? Because I don't know how to help you get there if I don't know where you're coming from. That's why we need to do strategy analysis. And then once I figure out where you're coming from and I know where you're trying to go, I can tell you 3 or 4 different ways you can get there. But I can also tell you which route is going to get you there efficiently and effectively with as little pain and risk as possible, right? So that's what strategy analysis is about. RAD is where a lot of BAs live. We spend a lot of time here. This is where we're taking that gap. We've defined current, we've defined future. Now we've looked at the gap. In that gap, we turn all of those gaps into requirements. Now we start documenting those requirements, designing them with processes and other kind of modeling, and we design a solution option that might be able to help me get there. That's what RAD is all about. So requirements analysis is about requirements. Design definition is when you start modeling out what that future looks like. It could be, design definition can be about screen mock-ups. It can be about functional decompositions of systems. It could be about architecture, context diagrams of what the whole infrastructure needs to look like to support it. What is that future state, right? Well, that's what I'm doing. I'm designing with models the future. In this, I also, again, we're not going to do this in a vacuum. So we're going to verify and validate. So I'm going to cover verify first, although validate is listed first. So verifying is when I'm making sure I did a good job. And what that means it's not implying doing a good job doesn't mean that I got the requirements right from a need perspective. It means what I understood, I documented it well. So what that means, verification is about, can I use these for what I'm trying to use them for? Are they written well? So if I'm doing business processes, did I follow the right rules on business process modeling? If I put all of this stuff together, can an implementation subject matter expert, which is your developers or your process integrators or people like that, can those people use this document and actually put this new solution in place? That's verification. Validation is where I say, is this holistic picture of these requirements, will it meet the need that's been defined? That's validate. So verify is, did I write it well? And is it usable for its intended purpose? And validate is, did I document a solution design that will meet the need? This is also the knowledge area where we take these different solution options we've identified and we try to figure out the cost benefit of each option so that our business, our stakeholders, can make an informed decision about what the right step is to move forward. Okay. And then we have solution evaluation. This is the last knowledge area. And this is where we look at solutions that are either already in development or already in place. And we say, okay, based on what we're trying to accomplish, is that solution meeting the need? So when you're doing demos and the technical team is showing you what that technical solution, after they've done some configuration, they're showing you what it can do. You're evaluating, is that actually capable of what we thought it would be capable of? Is it performing well? For a solution that's already in place, which is actually how the solution evaluation is written more, it's more from the perspective of being a proactive business analyst and looking at solutions that are already in the environment and saying, how well is this performing? What are the KPIs around it? If it's underperforming, how do we fix that? So that's what solution evaluation is about. It's about trying to make sure we're getting the most value out of solutions that we possibly can. Okay, when you're thinking about the BABOK, in each one of those knowledge areas are going to have tasks. The tasks are the essential elements that have to be performed in order for that knowledge area to be executed effectively and for us to solve problems. Each task is as needed. There is no absolute requirement in business analysis. That's what I'm saying. It's not very structured. You look at everything in the BABOK, and then you look at the situation you have handed to you, and you ask yourself, what things must I do for this solution, for this need to be met? And it's not going to be the same every time. It shouldn't be the same every time. And that's where I think business analysis has become a bad taste in some people's mouths, because they seem to think we need to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we don't. If we do that, we're doing unnecessary work. If all I'm trying to do is change a sort order on a report, I'm going to email the developer after I've made sure that I've got it right with the client, and I'm going to say, hey, can you change this report to have that sort instead? I'm done. I'm not going to draw models. I'm not going to go through a whole rigmarole of all kinds of stuff. But if you're asking me to do legacy modernization, I'm going to do almost every step in the book, right? So it's as needed. There is no requirement to do everything. There is not a specific order. I can repeat tasks many times, and I can do it in any order. And that's what I was trying to tell you earlier. Any questions about the structure of the BABOK with the knowledge areas and tasks? Okay. All right, so I'm going to give you a break. It's the 50-minute mark, a little bit later than that. It's the 33-minute mark. I'm going to give you just, by the time I finish talking to you, it's going to be the 34-minute mark. I'm going to give you just over 10 minutes. Let's come back at the 50-minute mark, please.